Welcome on PRZEkanal. We are hosting Annie Jacobsen today, well-known American journalist, the author of this book, which include insane scenario of nuclear war, and we're gonna talk about it in this conversation. Annie Jacobsen, welcome on PRZEkanal on YouTube. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's your first time in Poland?
It is my first time in Poland.
And how is your stay?
It's magnificent here. I went to see Chopin in the park yesterday.
Okay, you are here to promote your book, but before we start talking about this scenario written in your book, wojna nuklearna, możliwy scenariusz, nuclear war, a scenario. Please tell us about reason you write this book, where the story comes from.
Yes. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me. In America, I am a national security reporter, a journalist who writes about war and weapons, national security and secrets. Before this book, I wrote 6 other books, all on this subject matter: the Pentagon, the CIA, Area 51. And so in every one of those books, I had, let's say, 100 sources. Imagine how many of them said to me, Annie, I did what I did to prevent nuclear World War III. And so in the last administration, when former President Trump was engaged in a dynamic and a rhetoric with the leader of North Korea that threatened nuclear war, I began to think to myself, what if deterrence, prevention failed? What if we had a nuclear war? And I put that question to the top tier national security advisors to the president. And the result is nuclear war, a scenario.
The scenario is 22 minutes. During this time, many people gonna die. It's insane scenario, I have to say. It is really possible?
I write a scenario based on sources explaining to me and confirming with me what happens. And in this case, over the course of 72 minutes. So the book is in 3 acts: the first 24 minutes, the next 24 minutes, the last 24 minutes, and then nuclear winter. So essentially, I take the reader from nuclear launch to nuclear winter. And the spoiler alert on the book is that in the end, 5 billion people are dead.
In 72 minutes.
That is right.
Please tell us more about your sources. Who are they?
Mm-hmm. I list all the sources at the front of the book. Usually a journalist lists their sources at the end of the book. But I did this on purpose because I wanted readers to know right away, my God, this is sourced from people who have formerly been in the U.S. Nuclear Command and Control. And so I have 2 former U.S. Secretaries of Defense. I have the commander of the U.S. Nuclear Submarine Force, the former commander of Strategic Command. That is the man in charge of the nuclear arsenal. If the president gives the launch order, the Stratcom commander speaks to the forces.
How many minutes the president have to decide?
Well, you learn that in the book as I move through the ticking clock scenario. You know, I think at least in America, what is happening is that readers are responding with a kind of astonishment. At every step of the way, there's a fact that leaves you, how could this be? So to answer your question, readers learn right away that once the president is told, he has only about 6 minutes to decide how to make a nuclear counterstrike.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if in that such of time, in only 6 minutes, he or she can make a good decision.
You know, readers, as they're going along, if they want to know, how did Annie Jacobsen know this? They can go to the back, to the notes, and they can see precisely where the fact came from. And so the fact that you're referring to, that the President of the United States has only 6 minutes, you may say that can't be right. And you've even maybe heard other people say it's a different amount of time. But if you look in the source notes, you see that President Ronald Reagan, in his memoir, referred to this 6-minute window of time, and he called it irrational.
Yeah.
He said it was essentially an irrational amount of time to decide whether or not you were going to cause nuclear annihilation.
In your book, North Korea start this nuclear war, but in real life, who may start the nuclear war? What is the probability? Because in Poland, we are aware of Russia constantly.
Right.
So you are writing about North Korea. Why?
So that's a very important question. And I write nuclear war, a scenario, not nuclear war, the only scenario.
Yeah.
But I put the question that you are asking me to many of my sources. As I was writing the book and working through how I would do it, I found the answer of how to begin from 2 people. So the first was on the cover of the book. That is a nuclear bomb test in 1952 called Ivy Mike. It's a 10.4 megaton explosion. Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. That bomb was designed by Richard Garwin, the plans to explode the bomb. So everyone thinks of Edward Teller as the father of the thermonuclear bomb. But he couldn't figure out how to make it explode. He could only imagine it theoretically. And so he turned to the young Richard Garwin, 24 years old at the time. Richard Garwin is now in his 90s, and I interviewed him many times for the book. And I asked him what he was most worried about in the event of a nuclear war. What could trigger a nuclear war? Now, Richard Garwin has advised every U.S. president since Eisenhower. And Garwin told me that he was most scared of a rogue leader with a nuclear arsenal. And then he talked about Mad King logic. This idea, Garwin said to me, some leaders are like Napoleon. And he used the French phrase, après moi le déluge. After me, the flood. Like, I don't care. And that is why I chose the leader of North Korea to do what is called a bolt out of the blue attack. And another presidential advisor, Andy Weber, who advised President Obama, told me a bolt out of the blue attack is what Washington fears most.
Mm-hmm. It's possible that a nuclear war break out by a mistake. Just, incorrect interpretation of data.
That is also a possibility. And this is very frightening. Again, I write a scenario, not the only scenario. And so I think readers take away from the book the perilous nature of all of this. We live at the razor's edge. And the question becomes, why?
Yeah. So let's focus about this scenario and your book. How would the world look like after the nuclear bomb explosion?
Mm-hmm. Nuclear winter is a terrifying concept. Nuclear winter was originally released as a paper, a scientific paper, written by 5 authors, led by the very famous American astrophysicist named Carl Sagan. And nuclear winter theory came out in 1983. And at the time, the U.S. Defense Department said, oh, it's communist propaganda. Well, it wasn't. And I found a document in the archives, and I source it in the notes, that shows the Defense Department was actually very concerned about nuclear winter. But it was bad for business. It was bad to scare people. But one of the original 5 authors, Carl Sagan's student, was a professor named Brian Toon. And he is still alive, and he's been working on the climate modeling, the computer systems that really allow scientists to understand what would happen in a nuclear winter. And let me explain a few facts, if I may, about the science behind nuclear winter. So, we're getting to the end of the book now, so we will move around. But in the end, after you have thousands of nuclear strikes, each one of those strikes will turn into a firestorm, a tornado of fire that is several hundred miles around. And everything will catch on fire. The cities will burn. The forests will burn. And as a result of all the toxins and pyrotoxins and burning building materials, all of this soot gets lofted into the atmosphere. Something like 330 billion pounds of soot. And as a result, the sun's warming rays are blocked out. And so without sun, you cannot have agriculture. And when agriculture fails, people starve. And that is where the billions of people die. And that is a terrifying thought. And in the end of the book, Professor Toon takes me through the real terrifying specific details of what happens over the years.
Which countries gonna be involved in this nuclear war in your scenario?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe we tell listeners the 9 nuclear-armed nations that exist today. So there's the U.S. and Russia, China, the U.K. and France, Pakistan, India, Israel, North Korea. And in the scenario I choose, North Korea makes a bolt-out-of-the-blue attack against the United States with a strategic ballistic missile. That is a ICBM that is capable of leaving Pyongyang and striking the east coast of the United States in just 33 minutes. But as readers see, as the sequence of events begins to take place, because readers will learn that nuclear war is practiced in the United States, it's rehearsed. There are hundreds of thousands of people at the ready to move to the next step of nuclear war in the event that it happens. And this is remarkable and a shock to most readers. Most people do not know this, that once the United States learns of a nuclear attack, it begins. It is not like 9/11. Remember, if you remember on 9/11, George Bush is sitting in a chair and someone comes up and whispers into his ear, "Sir, the planes have hit the building." And then it begins. And it takes weeks and months and years. This is not that. Nuclear war begins in the first second that the satellites in space see the launch, and then it begins, and within minutes the president is told. And so while we begin with North Korea, readers see how as things happen, there are technological mistakes, there are competing interests, and ultimately Russia gets involved through a miscalculation. And that is why you have a full-scale nuclear exchange between Russia and the United States that will leave 5 billion people dead in 72 minutes.
And also, Russia has their dead hand system. It's also insane. Tell us more about it.
The dead hand system is really shocking. And it goes like this. So, built into the nuclear war concept today is this idea of deterrence. So deterrence means I have all my nuclear weapons, you have all your nuclear weapons. Neither one of us would ever be insane enough to fire at the other one because we would all die. But if you back up to the 1950s, that was not the plan. The plan was to fight and win nuclear war. And I show the readers a plan that America had to fight and win a nuclear war. And the way in which that would happen was through what is called a preemptive strike. So you strike first. So imagine if you have a duel, a Mexican duel or a standoff, and two people know never to fire at each other because they'll both die. But what if someone cheats? That's what preemptive strike is. I'm going to strike them while they're not looking. And so that is how it existed. That is how the system was created. And then everyone realized that was madness. Everyone would die. So now we have deterrence. I will never do it. Same weapons. But because the United States and Russia so distrusted one another during the Cold War, the Russians thought, what if the Americans cheat? And what if they strike us preemptively? And as a solution, they created the system you're referring to called the dead hand. And the dead hand placed sensors, like ground sensors, all over Russia that were, so in the event that America launched its nuclear weapons, the ground sensors would feel the earthquakes, the movement caused by the landing bombs. And if the ground sensors couldn't communicate with Russian nuclear command and control, the sensors would say, they've cheated and we're all dead, but we're going to kill them all anyways. And so the dead hand system, officially it was called perimeter, would launch nuclear weapons. And so the reason it's called the dead hand is because everyone could be dead and you didn't need the hand to push the button. The system would.
Do you think right now, during the Russian aggression on Ukraine, the threats of using that kind of nuclear bomb is rising?
I believe that one of the fundamental takeaway of the book is that nuclear war is insane. Nuclear weapons are insane. Nuclear threats are insane. And so the rhetoric that is coming from Putin right now, to my eye, is insane and incredibly dangerous. When I began writing this book during COVID, many of the individuals that agreed to speak to me on the record have not spoken on the record about nuclear war before. And one of the reasons they did back in time, 3-4 years ago now, was because they said to me, many people have forgotten about the threat of nuclear war. And here we are just a few years later with a world leader, with a nuclear arsenal. Russia has 1,674 nuclear weapons on ready-for-launch status. To threaten the use of a tactical nuclear weapon on the battlefield, we can get into the difference between a tactical weapon and a strategic weapon if you like. But just to speak to your question, to threaten the use of nuclear weapons is a red line that no one has ever crossed in 79 years. And that is extremely dangerous.
The Russian can use nuclear weapon, in a small version during this war on Ukraine, not to destroy Europe, just to destroy part of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you learn quickly in nuclear war, once nuclear war starts, there are no rules. It's just kill everyone. That is what it is. But before nuclear war starts, the idea of deterrence has rules. It has very serious rules. And one of the rules is no nuclear use. No nuclear use means no nuclear use. And it also means And it should mean no threatening nuclear use. And there is a motion at the UN right now. It is called the TPNW, the Treaty to Prohibit Nuclear Weapons. And it makes nuclear threats prohibited. And that should pass, and it must pass, because threatening to use nuclear weapons. And remember, Donald Trump did this, which I personally think is incredibly dangerous and was part of my inspiration of writing the book. It's a very bad idea. And before Mr. Trump did that, no U.S. president had ever verbally threatened nuclear war that I am aware of, because it is so dangerous. It just moves everything into an arena that is essentially unthinkable.
You said that Russia has their own nuclear weapon ready to launch. So I understand that U.S. government, United States as a country, is constantly ready to react.
Well, I mentioned the amount of weapons that Russia has ready to launch. The United States has the same amount. Actually, a few more. We have 1,000... We have 1,770 nuclear weapons. That's called parity. And so that is the dueling part of it. That you can imagine the kind of two sets of nuclear weapons pointed at one another. But that they are on ready for launch status, most people do not realize. And what that means is they can launch in as little as 60 seconds. And the submarines take about 14 minutes. The bombers take several hours.
You said that U.S. government, United States has their own system which can react automatically. Yes?
Well, it requires people. But when I say it's a system of systems, there are people in the mix. There are people making decisions. But for example, shall we take the reader through what happens in the beginning? So another thing that readers may find shocking is that America has a system in space called SBIRS. It's a space-based infrared system of satellites. They're parked in geosync, 1/10 of the way to the moon. That's how powerful the system is. It's built by Lockheed Martin. And they're parked over the nuclear-armed nations watching for a launch. So when the missile launches out the bottom, everyone can think of most of us have seen maybe on YouTube or a missile launch, and you can see there's hot rocket exhaust that comes out the bottom. The system in space sees it in the first fraction of a second. And that information goes from space down to data centers in the United States. And the computers process the information, notify the humans, and begin determining the trajectory of the ballistic missile. Is it going to Guam? Is it going to Moscow? Is it going to Hawaii? Is it going into space? Is it going to the East Coast? And only 100, 200 seconds pass before the nuclear command and control system in the United States realizes this missile is coming to the East Coast of the United States. And that gives you an indication of, so you can see, that's one step. Once they know that, then what happens? I tell readers, then what happens is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, sir, we have a problem. And, the Secretary of Defense, sir, we have a problem. Then they get on comms. Yeah. Now begins the next step. What are we going to tell the president in minutes? And they confer. Before they will allow the president to respond, you have to get what's called secondary confirmation. So there's another system on the ground. And in this case, it's in Alaska. And that system is now waiting and waiting to see what's called an over-the-horizon line of sight recognition. And that happens at around 8 minutes after launch. And so you can see all these different parts are moving toward telling the president. once the president learns, now he has 6 minutes to make a decision. And this is the kind of human chain of events that will unfold in the United States like that.
You've already said which countries has their own nuclear arsenal. So maybe you know which countries investing currently to develop this kind of nuclear weapons and so on.
I mean, you know, there are the nuclear weapons. You have to have a warhead. You have to have the fissile material, the highly enriched uranium inside it. And then you have to have the rockets, and you have to have the systems, and you have to have the command and control. It's an extraordinary complex system with a very high threshold to enter into it. And that is why we have 9 nuclear-armed nations presently that we know of. Right now, in this moment, Iran is working very hard to develop the nuclear bomb. And this is profoundly dangerous because I believe right now there's one sort of mad king in the scenario. Because even though Putin is very dangerous, Russia does play by the rules in terms of deterrence. North Korea does not. They do not announce their nuclear tests. Iran will not play by the rules. And so if Iran is allowed to get the bomb, I believe the floodgates will open as far as all the other countries in the Middle East. And again, this isn't my bright idea. This is the understanding of the intelligence community, not just in the United States, but around the world. And it's why so many people are worried about Iran getting the bomb, because then Saudi Arabia will want the bomb, and then other countries will want the bomb. And the more nuclear nations, the greater the chance of the miscalculation, of the misunderstanding, and of nuclear use.
So it can be Iran, not North Korea.
Well,
maybe.
Iran does not yet have the nuclear weapon. And that is why I did not choose Iran.
Okay.
Because everything in the scenario could happen.
Yeah.
It could happen later today. And that is what is terrifying. I'm not talking about if then. I'm talking about what could happen.
Yeah. Given Poland's strategic position in Poland and its membership in NATO, what do you think? How do you think the country's role could evolve in the event of rising tensions, rising tension related to nuclear threats?
Poland plays a very important role in the NATO element of nuclear deterrence. They sit on the eastern flank. And recently, I believe just maybe 2 weeks ago, there was an exercise where the B-52 nuclear-capable bombers from Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota came and ran exercises because the bombers need tankers. They need escorts. And so Poland, the Polish Air Force, supplied fighter jets to escort the B-52s. And so did, I believe, 5 or 6 other NATO countries. And you can begin to see that important role that is played in deterrence. It's a strengthening, don't you dare. But I think as the book demonstrates is that this posturing and this kind of don't you dare is also adding to the extreme tension. And I hope that people read the book, and the takeaway is we must back off the ledge because it is too dangerous.
So, that kind of scenario, what steps Poland should take just to ensure our own security in this unstable landscapes?
You know, I believe that the NATO strength, the partnership there, is an integral part of Western security. It's an integral part of the concept of deterrence, don't you dare. But the bigger issue of the book speaks to the idea that, you know, all of these nuclear weapons make us unsafe. I mean, let's speak for a moment about the all-time high. In 1986, there were 70,000 nuclear weapons. 70,000. And because Ronald Reagan saw a television movie called The Day After on ABC TV in America, it showed a fictional scenario of nuclear war between the US and Russia, then Soviet Russia. President Ronald Reagan saw this television movie. His advisors didn't want him to watch it. He saw the movie, and he wrote in his White House journal that he became greatly depressed. That's what he actually wrote. And he went from being a nuclear hawk, more nuclear weapons make us more safe, to saying, oh my God, this is madness. And as a result, he reached out to the enemy, Russia, Soviet Russia. And instead, in calling Gorbachev and treating the leader of Russia as an adversary, the world moved from, they had the Reykjavik summit, and then the world went from 70,000 nuclear weapons. Today we have approximately 12,500. That makes us safer. In my opinion, that is a movement in the right direction. And so I believe we should continue to move toward disarmament, slowly. It's a process. No one's going to do it overnight.
So maybe Poland should join nuclear sharing program. Many months ago, Polish President Andrzej Duda suggests that scenario.
I mean, this is a very complex issue that I don't get into in the book, because the NATO nuclear sharing countries that have nuclear weapons, and I write about them in the book, were Poland to become one of those countries, there's no doubt that the rest of the world will see that as aggression, that will see that as moving toward more nuclear, barriers. I believe fundamentally, after writing this book and after interviewing people, that we need to pull back slowly and reasonably, but we must move away from the idea of having so many nuclear weapons. It is madness.
You're good in scenario. So tell us about the scenario that we are in Poland aware of, and the scenario that Russia attacking NATO country or NATO countries. We are aware of that. What do you think about probability of that scenario?
Well, we just spoke a little bit about that. I mean, are you talking about with a tactical nuclear weapon, or are you talking about
just an attack,
attacking a NATO country?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think Putin knows that he can't do that because the Article 5 component of NATO is so strong. It always has been. It certainly is with the current administration. And I deeply regret that our former president suggested that NATO was, not good for the United States. I couldn't disagree. I mean, I don't get into politics, and I don't need to, because no one should be for a nuclear war. But I believe that most people, most Americans that are educated and are not just speaking flamboyantly, understand that the NATO partnership is profoundly important to world security. And Article 5 says, if you attack one of us, you attack all of us. And that is there for a reason. And I don't think nuclear weapons need to be expanded. I think that Article 5 does precisely what it is supposed to do.
What do you think about reasons of this war in Ukraine? Why Putin started?
I have to say that I was very surprised. I did not, and I have many individuals that I work with as sources for me who are former CIA officers who have worked in, understanding the mindset of world leaders. And I know that publicly the current CIA director, Burns, has stated that, the CIA knew what was happening. That was not my understanding at the time. I was very surprised. I was very surprised that that form of aggression in the world in which we live would happen. But it has happened, and here we are now.
after that, NATO is stronger, more united, maybe?
Well, most certainly NATO is more stronger. Most certainly NATO is more stronger.
Okay, so right now you don't believe in the scenario that Putin will attack, or you just said we don't know yet?
I can't imagine that anyone would be irrational enough to attack NATO, which means that you are attacking one, you're attacking all, because the U.S., all the NATO countries are nuclear. There are NATO partners that are nuclear capable. So that would be madness.
What do you think about Poland's role in this conflict?
When I think about, I mentioned Poland in nuclear war, a scenario, because a very interesting thing happened that I think is important. And one of the important ideas in the book is sort of demystifying some fantastical scenarios that most citizens believe to exist. One of which is that we have the capacity to shoot down an incoming ICBM with accuracy, and we do not. But another one is that every world leader is just seconds away from picking up the phone, that Joe Biden could pick up the phone and reach Vladimir Putin if he wanted to. That is not accurate. It doesn't mean the technology isn't there. It is. There are systems in place to make that phone call. But the phone call requires humans. And the best example, to bring it back to Poland, in the book, there's a tragic error that one leader cannot get another on the phone. And so that readers didn't say, that's implausible, I use an example that happened in the early days of the Ukraine war. There was a erroneous Associated Press report, erroneous, it turned out to be wrong, that a Russian missile had hit Poland, a NATO country, which would have invoked Article 5. This is a major crisis. And yet in the United States, our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest ranking military commander, the advisor to the president, General Mark Milley, couldn't reach his Russian counterpart for almost 36 hours. He gave a press conference and admitted this. This is shocking.
Yeah. In Poland, we are also wondering if the results of election in the United States can change something in our closest area, about security and specific war in Ukraine.
I mean, it's amazing that the world leaders, the positions that they have, impact the rest of the world so profoundly. I think one of the big takeaways of the book is that you also realize as civilians, all of us, we realize, wait a minute, why is it that a few world leaders, certainly anyone with a nuclear arsenal, has in the palm of their hand the ability to make a decision like that will affect billions of people? And I hope that the book causes people to reevaluate what that really means and why that is and whether or not it should continue.
I will ask about your previous book, because in your book you often refer to mysterious, uncovered parts of US history. There are any topics yet to be discovered?
I mean, I'm a very curious person, and I interview a lot of individuals in the military and in the intelligence community, mostly people who have left the business and then can speak freely about programs that have been declassified that maybe the American public didn't even know about. Oh, Annie, you should look into this, maybe this. And so I find this interplay between what has happened and what is known endlessly interesting. And that is what I spend my career reporting.
Yeah. Which book was a game changer?
Every one of my books has been a game changer. They're kind of like your children. You can't really pick favorites, you know. But for me, because I write narrative nonfiction, in other words, I take facts and I weave them through the story of the individuals at the heart of the matter, because I think that's what we relate to most, is the humanness. You know, yesterday I went to the Warsaw Uprising Museum, and it was magnificent. But the part of the exhibit that I responded to most, that got me in the heart, you know, really made me feel, was there's a hall of objects. And for example, there's the eyeglasses of an individual with blood on them, and it's in a case. And then there's a rosary bead of a pilot that believed that this rosary kept him safe. And then there's a teddy bear of a child that was found in the rubble of the Warsaw Uprising. And when I see those artifacts, it connects me. It connects me not just to my own humanity, but it connects me to every human, all of the people that go through wars. Wars are terrible. Perhaps it's in human nature that we continue to have them. Conflicts are terrible. It's very interesting for me to write about them because it becomes an ongoing thought question of what is it? Why is man's nature so warring? I don't know the answer, but what I do know is this book is different than the other books because the other books are history. This happened. And this book is a cautionary tale. It is saying this must never happen because there will be no history.
But
there will be no museums.
This may happen.
Well, I'm an optimist, so I have to believe it won't happen. I have to believe that people will read this, maybe even in the same way that President Reagan saw a TV film and changed his mind. Maybe a world leader will read this book and change their mind about aggression.
You said about Warsaw Uprising, of course, it's really important part of history. It's 8 years right now, 8 years before. And I want to back to your career because I'm wondering if there is any moments of your career that, you know, change everything. Maybe 2016 and final of Pulitzer Award.
Well, you know, that's a huge honor. It's not even a question that it's an honor. And I think that it opens up my work to other people, and that's amazing. Also, I report on the work of everyone's work that has done work before me becomes incredibly important. And so I hope that my work exists for future journalists to tackle the situations that they find interesting and worthy of more explanation.
Right now you're in Poland, and what is your next destinations?
I'm going to Sweden, the new NATO member. I find it very, you know, what's interesting about this book, this is my first time as an author, and I'm a very popular author in America. And yet
yes,
this,
we know it.
But yet this book is having an effect in Europe. Yeah. And that is very important to me. This book, Nuclear War Scenario, was on the Sunday Times bestseller list in the UK. It was on the Der Spiegel bestseller list in Germany. I hope that it's on the bestseller list in Poland. I hope that people read it, not just for my own sake as an author, and that would be great. Thank you very much. I hope people read, but also truly, because this book affects all of us. This affects all of us. Nuclear war is insane. That is the takeaway. And what's astonishing to me about this book is that so many individuals who do not normally speak on the record about nuclear war were willing to talk with me about nuclear war because it is a very dangerous time. And the general consensus from many of my sources was we have to pull back from all of this.
As I said, It's an honor to have you here. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Annie Jacobsen was our guest today. Thanks for watching and subscribe PRZEkanal.